Special guest this evening is Sam Baltrusis, and Sam's been on the show before. It's always wonderful to have him on. Let me get you his bio here. Sam Baltrusis, author of Ghosts of Boston, Haunts of the Hub, and Ghosts of Salem, Haunts of the Witch City, is the former editor-in-chief of Spare Change News and teaches journalism classes at Malden Access TV, MATV. He has been featured as Boston's paranormal expert on the Biography channel's Haunted Encounters and Paranormal State Ryan Buell's Paranormal Insider Radio. As a side gig, Baltrusis moonlights as a guide and launched the successful ghost tours Boston Haunts and Cambridge Haunts. In October 2014, he spearheaded a boat tour called Haunted Boston Harbor. Baltrusis is also a sought-after lecturer who speaks at dozens of paranormal-related events scattered throughout New England. In the past, he's worked for VH1, MTV.com, Newsweek, ABC Radio, and as a regional stringer for the New York Times Paranormal Journalist and Ghosts of Boston. Author Sam Baltrusis has traveled all over Massachusetts in search of New England's most haunted, and from the oldest continuously operating hotel, the Omni Parker House, to the beautiful but extremely active Haunted Victorian in Gardner, Baltrusis breathes new life into the long departed. For more information, go to 13mosthaunted.com. I posted that link into the chat room. And his new book, 13 Most Haunted in Massachusetts, Volume 1, is now live. You can purchase this on Amazon.com, and I will post a link in the chat as well. So please welcome Sam to the show this evening. Hey there.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you? I hear all the wind rustling in the background.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I was forced out of my place. We had an impromptu fire alarm at my building.
Such timing, as we were saying, right?
Yeah, I basically, I was kind of outside by the Mystic River. It's absolutely beautiful, but it's really cold here. So I'm going to try to get to shelter at some point during the interview.
Wow. You don't have a jacket on or no?
Oh, no, I do. Yeah, I grabbed my jacket. Yeah.
What's the temperature out there, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, it's not that bad, 50 degrees, but it's by the water, have a great view. It's also extremely active out here, so we may have a close encounter while we're talking.
Wow, you mean active as in spirit or people?
Yeah, this is active with spirits. Yeah, this is prime Native American land. This is Mystic River. If you know the book by Dennis Lehane and the movie, that was made a few years ago. Mystic River's Somerville, and this was a Native American hotspot for many years. So there's a lot of native energy around here.
Nice. So what kind of paranormal activity happens around there?
A lot of it's just residual. So a lot of people, they sense sort of an energy that's here, and there's also a sensation of like a residual energy. So people have spotted like apparitions. Some people have claimed to have seen Native American spirits walking around in this area.
Nice. Is there a burial ground there then?
I'm assuming there probably is, and it's probably like a lost burial ground. So yeah, I'm not sure, and I can't confirm it, but this is where they would fish.
Mm-hmm. Wow, sounds nice. Yeah, what an eerie time too. It's like after midnight up there. So yeah, happy haunting, right?
It's my life. I was
going to say, it's right up your alley, isn't it? And what's wonderful, we were talking about this, we were talking about it off air a little bit about how your career is really taken off right now. I mean, you're just doing wonderfully. So tell everybody how you got involved into doing this kind of thing and writing about the haunted areas.
Well, it started because I was a journalist for 20 years, and I started, I would always write the Halloween kind of haunted hotspot type story for various magazines. And I did one in 2007 for what was called Stuff Magazine. And it just people really responded to it. It was about Boston. And that turned into my first book. And then it just exploded from there.
Mm-hmm. You really are taking off. So let's fill the audience in on your new books. Of course, let's talk about the new book. You just released this. Now, this just went live. Just like what? How long ago?
Yeah, literally 24 hours ago. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, congratulations.
Yeah, I feel so good about this book, and I think I'm hoping that people pick up on it because Salem was a huge hit for me, and this is like right after Salem, so I'm hoping that people respond to it. But I'm really what I did is I took what worked well for my first 3 books, which are my introductions. My introductions are kind of like first-hand accounts of what happens when I'm out in the field. And the rest of the book is more historic research type stuff. And so this is sort of my personal experiences at all of these 13 locations.
Excellent. Well, can you give us kind of a precursor and a rundown on some of the information in the book? So why 13? First of all, obviously that's kind of an esoteric, mystical number.
Yeah, I did 13 mainly because Well, to make a strong book, you want to gear for a certain word count. It kind of fit perfectly with the word count, and oddly, it's 130 pages, and it's 13 most haunted. So this all kind of worked out for me, and I did it mainly because the list was very difficult. Like how do you pick the most haunted locations in an entire state? And I probably could fit in like 20 locations easily, but these are the top 13 that I feel have the strongest energy based on my personal experiences and my experiences talking to other people who have investigated these locations.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, give us a rundown insofar as some of the locations.
Well, the most haunted, I mean, I started with number 13 is where it all began for me, which was Boston Common. And Boston Common was about the main source of my first book, Ghosts of Boston. And so that's number 13. Omni Parker House is a part of that because it's right across the way from the Boston Common. Have Spidergate Cemetery in Leicester, Mass. We have the most haunted is the Haunted Victorian, which is in Gardner, Mass. And that place has terrified me for years. And I finally was able to go inside and check it out. And it's very, very active there.
Mm-hmm. And how is it active? Give us some examples.
Well, I mean, there's multiple ghosts there. It's a portal. It's an old Victorian. It looks haunted, first of all. So it's and there's a history. Ghost Adventures has been there. Ghost Hunters has been there. The spirit that reached out to me, her name's Maddie Cornwell, and I placed after doing some research and talking to Joni Mahan, who wrote a book on that location. I kind of narrowed it down to this one woman, but she would come to me in my dreams, and she wasn't happy. She was kind of summoning me like there. What I found is she's actually the caretaker of that house, and she loved the house. So she was kind of calling all sensitives to that location. People have felt they've been pushed. There were bones found in the basement. There's a guy a male entity that's in the basement that has been aggressive toward me and other people. So there's a lot of stuff going on there.
Wow, that's really interesting. So how is the male entity or spirit? How is he aggressive?
For me, it was the typical go away or you don't belong here. He like a lot of disembodied voices. People have felt the sensation of being pushed. Mm-hmm. There's a really negative energy in the basement. So, and wow. It turns out one of the heirs of the S.K. Pierce Victorian Mansion, he died a pauper. He lost all his money, and he actually was living in the basement. So we think it's him. It's one of the sons, wow. Edward Pierce.
Mm-hmm. So the bones that were found in the basement, are those his bones?
Yeah, I mean, you have to read the book, but yeah, there were actually a little girl was her bones were kept there.
Okay, so we do have to read the book, and obviously I have to get that book.
Yeah.
So literally it is about, okay, so I'll have to read that. Well, that's very interesting then. Very much so.
Yeah. So there's a lot of history there that sort of a hush history that has been uncovered, and it's one of those. Like for example, when they built the house, the wife died pretty quickly after moving in, and she had a mysterious bacterial infection. So there's a lot of death in that house.
Wow, do you think it's associated with a curse of some kind, or no?
I would, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something. I don't know who would have cursed them, but I do know that the men that lived in the house were kind of known for being womanizers, and they would bring other women into the house. So I'm thinking there's a war going on with the men and the women in the house as far as spirits.
Right, just some bad mojo in general, energetically speaking, right?
Exactly. And there was a whole history. There was supposedly one of the spirits in the house is a prostitute. And the thing is, there's no history of it actually being a brothel, but I wouldn't be surprised that prostitutes were brought into the house. There was a period that it was actually a flop house for a while.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me. And what date was this again? How old is this place?
Late 1800s. So it's coming up like 150 years.
Oh, okay.
So it's like more than a century.
Right. That's pretty old. Yeah. That has a lot of history. Did you grab a lot of footage? Did you take pictures and did you do any video?
Yeah, we're doing a documentary. It's called 13 Most Haunted in Massachusetts. It's a 30-minute countdown show. I taped it last Tuesday. it turned out really good. So I'm really happy with the documentary that we did.
Nice.
It's not like a typical documentary. It's kind of like a radio countdown, like listing the 13 most haunted.
Mm-hmm. And how will this be available? Or how can people access it?
Well, it's going to play throughout Massachusetts throughout the end of October on multiple public access stations, and it'll probably be available online at the very end of the month as well.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, congratulations. You've been moving really quickly then. That's great and good timing.
Yeah.
Right in time for Halloween.
Yeah, the thing is, my assistant was like, stick with what you do, which is write books. And I'm like, I also have a background in television production as well. So I'm like, I want to actually turn this into a documentary or like a TV show as well. And it turned out great. So it actually translated very well to television.
I think it's fabulous. Yeah, so it's really nice to put that in visual so people can see it. And yeah, I think a documentary is awesome. So I'm excited to even take a look at that. So hopefully you'll be able to keep us informed once you start rolling it around the country.
Yeah, and the photographer his name's Frank Grace, and he is definitely one of the top paranormal photographers out there. He just has a way of capturing sort of the creepiness of a location, and while sort of maintaining the historical, integrity of the building as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really good. Now, you were touching base with me about some of the stuff that happens to you is kind of strange and synchronistic to some degree. Can you go into a little bit more detail insofar as what goes on with you? It sounds like you do attract some paranormal activity wherever you go.
I do, yeah. I mean, whether I like it or not, I mean, just something like my fire alarm going off tonight at the exact time you called was so bizarre.
I know.
Every time I'm expecting something weird to happen. So like the fire alarm happened tonight. The last time there was broken glass. There's always something weird will happen. My current place is not haunted, but it's of course close to a haunted location. Mm-hmm. But I have a tendency of gravitating towards, whether it's my work or my living situation, to a place that's active.
Right. That's so funny. So it's not just me, right? It's obviously other shows too where this kind of strange activity happens, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. Like I turn. You probably know this. You can turn it on and off, and
right.
Well, you have to when you do a show or if you do like a radio show or write a book, you have to turn it on. And when I turn it on, sometimes it goes haywire.
That's so funny. Well, the fire alarm is quite interesting. I think things have toned down a little bit, right?
Yeah. Like I'm going to head back to my
okay.
spot.
Good. So if we I was going to say if we cool. Go ahead.
No, it's getting a little chilly out here.
Right. So if we lose the signal, I'm not going to worry. I'll just call you right back. So no worries. Yeah, just keep trekking around. We'll be fine. So I did want to go into some the 13 Boston Common, or let's see, the Boston Commons. Okay.
Right.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that one?
Yeah, there's so much to the Boston Common. Like I started off giving ghost tours. So my first book was Ghosts of Boston, and when I write my books, I spend months, years doing research on a specific location. So I spend like the past 5 years researching the Boston Common, and that's hallowed ground. Boston is 75% man-made land, so 25%, which is the Boston Common, goes back many, many years. So there's a lot of history there, and there's a lot of alleged hauntings. So a lot of the locations around the Boston Common are Boston's most active locations, and the land predates the 1600s.
Mm-hmm. It's really old land right there. Yeah. So you've obviously had some interesting encounters on a spiritual level, or people have seen apparitions to some degree, right?
Yeah, my first interaction in Boston, well, I had one back in the early 90s, but my first kind of profound experience was with a girl at the Central Burying Ground, and I didn't realize that there was a whole history there with this girl being spotted at this location. And I saw the girl; she was wearing a hospital gown. She had the saddest eyes I've ever seen, and I jumped over the fence, which I would recommend not doing because it really hurt. To get closer, and she disappeared. And I didn't know the whole backstory of there's a Dr. Matthew Rucker who spotted the same girl back in the 1970s. And so there's a whole history of people have photos. She presents herself, I call her married, I think to tell her story, like what happened to her and why she's there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what is the vibration like when you see these images? I mean, what kind of energetic do you get? Do you get chills, or is there something with a temperature drop or anything interesting?
Yeah, you definitely have cold spots. Mm-hmm. my skin. I mean, I'm very intuitive, so like my hair will stand on end. I'll have I get what my friends call as a ghost face, where I'm like something's going on. So like what's going on, and then usually I know it's about to happen.
Mm-hmm. Right, you're really switched on. There's no doubt about it. And also, have you done any seances at these locations that you've just done investigations on, or?
Yeah, I'm pretty much against that.
Are you? Okay.
I think that like it happens naturally, and I don't try to force it. I think when you have a seance, it kind of summons spirits, which I'm personally against. My assistant, when I first started doing this, he was like with a candle and like doing seances, and I can do that pretty naturally.
Right, yeah,
I don't have to necessarily like summon the spirits, but I know people who do that. I just prefer not to do that.
I think you're right, actually, because you might get more than you ask for when you start doing stuff like that in an area that's very hot already.
Yeah, I like very much against Ouija boards, and people that do it, I talk a little bit about that in my last book, or the one that I wrote that hasn't come out yet. It's called Haunted Provincetown, but I'm kind of personally against it, and I've seen several cases in my book that where it goes a little haywire and causes a lot of problems.
Right. Well, can you give some examples?
Yeah, I mean, even like my first book, we talk about Charles Gate, and Charles Gate was a dorm. It was a former flop house, or kind of like a transient hotel in Boston. And the kids, there were a lot of college kids there, and they started doing seances and Ouija board sessions, and all hell broke loose at this the Charles Gate, and there was like stories written about it. People had encounters. It was a really intense energy was sort of summoned there.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, it seems to me like if you take young people, any type of drugs or alcohol, and a Ouija board, you're going to run into problems. And bring in a lot of Yeah, my first book had a campus haunts or college haunts location. A lot, school spirits represents the school. Like if you have ghost stories, it's about school pride, really. Mm-hmm. And so, I went to Boston University, and we had our Eugene O'Neill allegedly haunted the place I lived at, which was called Shelton Hall. And so everyone has their ghost stories. Do I think it's more legend? Probably. But the Charles Gate has always kind of creeped me out for years. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was actual activity there. Right. And also when you even talk about, when you put your energy or your attention on the energy, then obviously you're going to magnify it. So if there is some kind of a myth or some kind of a legend and people focus on that, I would say that it would amplify the situation and possibly create some kind of an event. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, like my dorm, I lived in this kind of serendipitous. Like I always live in the room that is allegedly haunted. I lived in the room that Eugene O'Neill supposedly he actually died in that room from alcoholism. But I never had an experience there. So even though I lived in the haunted room, I never had only like kind of flickering lights, but nothing major happened to me while I was staying there.
Well, that's really good, considering it's my impression that when people transfer out in a certain room, there's usually a portal of some kind that's opened, a signature or an imprint. So that's pretty low key. If that didn't, you weren't affected by anything. That's great. But what are the chances of you being in that room, right?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that it's definitely it's not haunted, but I would say that that it was creepy, and I can see why there were a lot of ghost stories associated with that location. Right.
Do you ever think that do they ever try to go in to clear or bless the area, consecrate it, trying to move the energy to a higher frequency? Does anybody ever try to do that or no?
Yeah, I mean, for example, the number one on my most haunted list, S.K. Pierce Victoria Mansion, there's been multiple cleansing attempts, and the activity there is so intense that people said that it actually didn't work. In some cases it did work, but there's so much going on. I think there is a portal there that no matter what you do as far as cleansing or blessing or whatever, it doesn't necessarily stop the activity.
Right, that's interesting.
Well, the spirit that I was talking, her name is Maddie Cornwell. She was crossed over, but she was sort of the gatekeeper of that house. Mm-hmm. And when she crossed over, it all hell broke loose. I mean, like she was the one kind of keeping everything together in the spirit world at that location. Right,
that makes sense. So it might have brought in some other things. What is the history of the land there? Do you know?
At Gardner, well, I mean, I do know. I mean, I'm not really 100% sure of the land there because it's been around since the 1800s, but I do know that was sort of the premier house. People love that location. There's a lot of when we were doing our video shoot there was a lot of people would drive by and say, like, that place really is haunted. So it's kind of like it's the haunted house of Gardner.
Mm-hmm. Right. Everybody has kind of like an impression of it being. Well, that's interesting. I guess that it might have something to do with the energetic signature of the land itself. You always kind of wonder, what was there before they built the housing and the residents and things like that. So what about entity possession? You mentioned something about the Ouija boards, and you've written a bit about that. Have you ever seen anybody taken over or possessed by a spirit that wanted in?
I haven't seen that personally, but I have, I do have friends who have had that experience, and I've had attachments before. I haven't necessarily been possessed, but it definitely has, or been taken over by energy. And I have to be really careful because I am insensitive, that I don't allow those energies inside, coming inside me or using me as a sort of as a conduit. But yeah, the energies at these locations are really dark. So this is probably my darkest book yet when it comes to actual entities versus like residual hauntings or poltergeist or other types of activity.
Mm-hmm. And how is it dark? I mean, let's give them a description. Let's give everybody a description of how does it become ominous and dark?
Well, I mean, like the number one most haunted, like whatever's in the basement is definitely a negative energy, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're an entity. It may just mean that they're just like how people are good and bad. There's like bad spirits at that location. But a lot of the locations, like for example, the Lizzie Borden house, which everyone talks about the Lizzie Borden house, and that's number 4 on my list, or to the top 5. There's been a lot of conjuring there, and I wouldn't be surprised if something was brought in from all the action and attention on that location.
That's strange. So people actually go there and try to summon something, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of like Salem. It's sort of, people go to Salem to summon, like to whatever, to talk to the spirits or to, celebrate Halloween or whatever they do, and they kind of they unleash a lot of darkness in Salem by doing that. Yeah,
it seems like they're summoning a bunch of boogies, and who knows, some of them are in control, and I suspect some aren't. Yeah. Well, you have to be careful, as I've said, when you start opening up doorways and astral portals. You never know what's going to come on in and visit. So. Yeah, especially if there's something traumatic, like the Lizzie Borden thing. To me, is like, I don't know why anybody would want to summon anything out of that. But you actually visited this location. What was your impression, energetically speaking?
I feel like, it's weird. Like a lot of I have different responses compared to other people. The Lizzie Borden house, because I'm sensitive, I can definitely feel like the murder definitely psychically imprinted itself on that building. So I can feel it.
Right. Yeah, I think so.
And I don't like it.
Right.
S.K. Pierce the spirits are very active there. So for me, the Lizzie Borden house was more of a psychic imprint that's still there, and the energy is negative in the house.
It makes sense. Well, whenever there's something like that where people, shed blood in the illusion of, that's prana, that's life force, and it tells me that would attract anything on a different interdimensional, multidimensional space, lower astral field, parasitic energetics. That's just my own impression whenever there's something tragic like that happens. So, yeah, it's really interesting. I applaud you for going in there and actually writing about it, though. I've heard a lot of people always excited about going to those locations, and for the life of me, I can't really figure it out because I don't really get into places like that, energetically speaking. It doesn't do much for me. So, but yeah, it's something worth investigating. I was going to ask you about the haunted locations. Now, most haunted locations in residential places, where's the hot spot? Is it usually the basement, or where do you find that there's most activity?
Yeah, it's really you say that because like a lot of the places that I feature in the book, that's the most active spot. Like the Houghton Mansion in North Adams that I went to, the darker energies in the basement, and I guess because that's where the secrets are. Like that's where the bones are. That's where possibly people were capped or tortured. So yeah, the basement is kind of a recurring theme in the 13 Most Haunted in Massachusetts book.
And the basement now, is it underground? Is the foundation kind of underground, or did you notice?
Every place. Yeah, it is like the S.K. Pierce Victorian Mansion. It is beneath the ground.
Okay.
And you said, like, do I know the history of the land? There's a potential ley line there, so that could be why it's active as well.
And what about water? There's obviously water around too, right?
Yeah, exactly. And water does have an impact on activity.
Right. And also they say power lines do as well. They attract entities of some kind. Have you heard that?
Yeah, electricity. If there's like a substation nearby, there could be potential electromagnetic activity. So there's a lot from experience. It's water and it's train tracks for some reason that attracts that.
Yeah, you mentioned that before on the show, and I always thought that was very fascinating. So it's the train tracks. Any indicators as to why that is? Do you think it's something that the tracks are made out of, or is it just the psychic energetic of the direction, or what?
I'm not really sure. I mean, it's it's scientifically based on my friend who did the research on this. There are more sightings by water, places that are near water, and also by train tracks. So it was just something that he plotted all the alleged haunted locations in Massachusetts and throughout the country, and he found sort of like recurring themes, and it included water and train tracks.
Yeah, there's something eerie about train tracks to me, and even the sound of a train late at night for some reason. Some people like trains. I don't really care for them a whole lot, but I find them to be kind of eerie.
I actually like trains.
Do you? Okay.
I've traveled a lot on trains, and it's kind of soothing to me. And I think that it's about a journey. It sort of represents a journey, and to me, it's like a warm feeling when I travel by train.
Well, that's a good thing. I've never been on one, to be honest with you. Isn't that strange?
Really?
That's weird, but oh well, maybe one of these centuries in the illusion of. Now, I was going to ask you also about, we talked about the basements having a lot of activity. What about bathrooms? Do you notice them also around bathrooms as well, or no?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, because I feel, water turns on and off. Toilets mysteriously flush. I have one spirit in Boston. You talked about the Boston Common earlier. George Parkman. He was cut into pieces by Dr. John Webster. This is in the mid 1800s, and he was flushed down the privy or the toilet. And back in the it was like the crime of the century in Boston. And he was supposedly that's I call it phantom flush, but supposedly every year on the exact day of his murder, he comes back and the toilets in the brownstone near the Boston Common overflow. So bathrooms have a lot of activity, which is weird and interesting.
Yeah, it is. I've heard things about the water also in drains, that it attracts spirits, or for some reason, something about the drains and the water that attracts them to some degree. I've heard that. That's why I was curious about the bathrooms and the basements. Obviously, that's one of the major ones. Any other locations in the area or houses where you've noticed hot spots? Usually not probably the bedrooms, or what would you say about that?
No, I mean, definitely, especially if there was a murder or some sort of suicide murder happen in a room, that would leave a slight imprint on that location. Right. So certain rooms, specifically like the Lizzie Borden house and the Houghton Mansion, and also the S.K. Pierce Victorian. There are certain rooms that are more active than other rooms.
Right, and of course, obviously, hotel rooms where there's been a tragedy of some kind, those have a signature.
Yeah, I mean, Tommy Parker House, which is right next to the Boston Common. There's room 303 that supposedly was the inspiration for Stephen King's 1408, and that's where a gentleman committed suicide. Mm-hmm. And he was a womanizer, and the suicide left a psychic imprint on that room, mm-hmm. according to legend.
Right. And have you been in that room?
Yeah, what's weird? The legend is that the room that is currently 303, because they reopened that room, is not the same room where he committed suicide, and there's like an electric closet was the actual room where he committed suicide. And I can't prove that. I think that's more legend. I do think that there was a gentleman that did kill himself on that floor, because that floor is very active. Right. But I don't necessarily know the history of the room being closed and sort of being an off limits room for 50 years, which is what the legend is.
Mm-hmm, right. That's kind of eerie when you go into a hotel room, and I guess they really can't disclose that unless they want to advertise it as a haunted hotel. But literally, if somebody's checking in and somebody's transferred out in one of those rooms, do they have an obligation to communicate that that's happened, or no?
No, they actually, because you asked me this before, it's only if they sell the house. So they sell the location, then they have to tell the new owners that there was a murder or something tragic happened, or that it was allegedly haunted. If people are renting a room or are staying overnight in a room, they don't have to disclose that to them.
That's right. I think we did touch on that. That's kind of creepy, though. I would like to know if something like that's gone on, but I suspect most people would psychically pick up on it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people love it, and they love staying. Like the Lizzie Borden house is a bed and breakfast, And people
Jeez.
love it. I mean, people love staying there, and they love staying at one of the most haunted locations in Massachusetts.
So strange. Okay, so they stay there and they enjoy themselves, and they go home, and maybe they have a hitcher, right?
Yeah, well, they do. A lot of people want to do paranormal investigations. Actually, the most haunted a lot of the locations in my book are either currently are turning into like a bed and breakfast. So the S.P. Pierce Victorian Mansion in Gardner, that is the most haunted in Massachusetts, based on my research and other people's research, is being turned into an overnight location. So it's not going to be a bed and breakfast because there's not enough bathrooms in the house to make it that, but he's going to rent out the entire house for people if they wanted to to investigate or to stay overnight. They can stay there and rent it out the entire house.
Well, I guess that's a good idea. I mean, it's a good way to make money in the illusion of, right?
Yeah, I mean, and there's also a lot of history, and the history is, the S.T. Pierce house was sort of the house for many years. It was like the go-to place. The P.T. Barnum stayed there, Betty Davis stayed there, so there was always like luminaries that stayed at that house in Gardner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds kind of interesting. Have you measured any EVPs or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, Joni Mahan, who wrote the intro to my book, she wrote Bones in the Basement. She's also a paranormal investigator, and she has tons of EVPs from that location, and they're terrifying. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I've heard is a lot of negative energy that's still lingering in that house. And Ghost Adventures was at that location, and they picked up some pretty disturbing EVPs. The one was "Go to Sleep" was a female voice told that to Zach from Ghost Adventures, and I feel strongly whatever that female entity was probably Maddie Cornwell.
Oh, that's really interesting. So they sound like does the EVP sound like a woman, or does it sound like a child, or were they different?
It sounds like a woman, like possibly an elderly woman, but Maddie Cornwell was in her mid-20s, but she looked older than what she was. So she was sort of a kind of a maternal caretaker type, and supposedly that's how she is in the afterlife as well. That's
really kind of creepy, isn't it, when you get those things, in my opinion, when they start really measuring some of that. I was wondering if there were any children that wander around and you hear voice patterns of children at all with the EVPs.
Yeah, there's a boy. We're not really sure where the boy comes from, but there's a boy that's been spotted in the house and when it's been vacant. And my friend Rachel, she's part of a paranormal investigation group called Paranormal Expeditions, and they did an episode in that house, and her sister was pregnant at the time during the investigation, and she was leaning over a bed, and they picked up an EVP that said "Mama." So there's definitely child activity or children activity happening at the location.
What's really interesting, I mean, people measure this. Obviously, they measure the EVPs, but what's really interesting is that we are constantly bombarded with some kind of noise in one form or another, through dialogue, through communication, whatever it is, through radio frequency. I think that's really interesting that gets captured, and yet when people don't even focus on that sort of thing, it's probably running around the ethers and who knows where. So I find it very interesting that it's a very noisy area. I mean, I think the world is a very noisy place, to be honest with you.
Yeah, like my place outside my house is noisy right now, but yeah, I definitely agree with you.
Noisy as in paranormal?
No, it's not active tonight. I don't feel anything paranormal, but it's a kind of a hot spot in Somerville. So people are walking around, coming out of bars and restaurants now. So. Oh
wow! So it gets a little. Yeah. Did you get back to the place? Are you back inside?
I'm back. Yeah, back in my place. But when we go to break, I'll head upstairs back to my apartment.
Oh, good. Okay.
Because I don't want to cut off our connection.
Oh, that's okay. Well, if you do get disconnected, like I said, I pull you right back in, so it's not a big deal.
Okay.
But yeah, and we're heading in we have about 20 minutes. Are you okay for 20 minutes?
Yeah, I can do 20 minutes.
Okay, I just want to make sure because I don't want you to feel uncomfortable where you're at, and I want to make sure are you okay?
No, it's fine. We're good.
Oh, good. Well, let's talk about some kind of spooky tales. Let's talk about some of the events you've had. Obviously, we're in the season of the witch. We're in Samhain and coming up around the corner, whatever you want to call it, Halloween. So let's talk a little bit about any thing that comes to mind with a spooky tale you'd like to share with everybody.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this last time, but when I actually went to, because I was researching my book, Haunted Provincetown, last Halloween. So I spent the year before I spent my time in Salem, which, is active no matter what time of year, but it's very active on Halloween. But I went to Provincetown, and it was I saw what looked like a cryptid. There was like a kind of like a Jeepers Creepers type creature that I encountered, and I thought for sure that it was someone dressed up as a costume. But looking at it again, there was no way that the head would be that small. So I had a really bizarre interaction last Halloween in Provincetown, and I also, like, getting back to Salem, I had, while doing research for Ghosts of Salem, I had a mark of Untrinity on my chest outside of the Joshua Ward House, which is also being turned into a boutique hotel called The Merchant. So, I mean, I've had a lot of, the spirits getting a little bit more aggressive toward me, and I think they're trying to get my attention.
Right. So that was actually something actually touched you and actually left a mark on you.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a burning sensation on my chest, and then when I was able to like see what it looked like, it was scratch marks on my chest.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I think you touched on that before. If it were me and I had something like that, I think I'd try to redefine where it was coming from. I'm almost getting the impression it was somebody trying to remote influence, but I don't know. Would you think it was a real spirit or somebody just being into their bad magic scene?
I think it was potentially bad magic. I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but I think there was. There's a lot.
Are you there? On that note, where'd you go, Sam? Hang on, everybody. Where are you, Sam? Your signal's dropped out. Hang on, everybody. He's in motion here. Hey, Sam, are you there? Hang on, everybody. I'm going to call him back. I'm going to disconnect and call him just a second here. Okay. All right. And on that note, yeah. Interesting night, wouldn't you say? All right, let me try to get him back here. Give him a second or two. I think he was moving around a little bit. No more fire alarms, let's hope. Hello.
Hi, this is Sam. Please leave a message and I'll call you back.
Hang on, you guys. All right, let me try him again. So obviously, we'll give it a second or two here. So anyways, this is Sam Baltrusis that we've been interviewing. I've been interviewing tonight. I hope you're appreciating him. He's been on the show before. He has some very good books on ghosts and spirits, and he's done a lot of historical investigations. And if you haven't picked up his books, check them out. They're on Amazon.com. He has a new book out, and I'm excited to read it. So let me try again. Well, let's see. He was talking about creepy stuff, and I hope everything's okay over there. I'm sure it is. More voicemail, Sam. Get him back. Some point in the continuum.
Hey there. Sorry,
Yes!
I must have got cut off when I went back inside.
I figured as much. And, on that note, as we were talking about, Mojo and this and that, it's kind of funny that you kind of vaporized on air. But, but that's okay.
Story of my life.
Yeah, I called you and your answering machine kicked on. I was like, what? So anyways, I'm glad.
But so now I'm back inside. Now I'm warm, so we can talk more intimately now. So.
Oh, very good. I'm glad you're back inside. Okay. So anyways, we're talking about that kind of remote kind of influence, or possibly somebody might be trying to send something towards you energetically that affected your body. And what my take was, obviously you understand psychic self-defense, and you understand that when something like that happens, do you counter it, or do you just do you process it and then wait and then counter it, or are you on to people doing things to you from a distance?
Yeah, my thoughts are like I don't engage with it. So by engaging with that, you're giving them power. I mean, you protect yourself with white light and with prayer and positive energy, but that usually I'm able to deflect the negative stuff. So if it does happen, it's if I feel like I'm not going to say that like the mark of Trinity was done by a spell or by someone that didn't like me for whatever reason, but I do think that does happen, and I try to stay away from it.
Right. Yeah, I think there's some tricksters in the atmosphere. We've talked about that before. There's good and bad everywhere with energy and magic and ritual. So I think that sometimes, especially this time of year, people do tend to harness some things that maybe get out of control. Now, you did talk a little bit about the cryptoid, which I found really interesting. What about werewolves? I know there's been people that have had recent sightings of werewolves. Have you heard anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely. Do I think werewolves exist? I'm not sure. I mean, I haven't had that kind of personal experience, but I have heard of that, and I think that it's possible. I mean, the shapeshifters are possible, and I think that I wouldn't discount it immediately, but I have not heard of anyone that I find credible say that they've encountered a werewolf.
Right. Yeah, I've heard a lot of stories too, and I still haven't done like the real extensive research, but it's very, very interesting if that is the case. Now, obviously, they associate a lot of werewolves with witches, but also skinwalkers too. And I'm not sure if you've done much research on the skinwalker at all.
No, I mean, it's weird because I really didn't have like the cryptids and cryptoids. I didn't really have a lot of experience until Provincetown on them, and there was a lot in the cave, and I feel I'm not really well versed on that as much, but I'm kind of you kind of get into that. You're kind of forced to by doing paranormal research.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think once you start opening the door to this area, other things start to fall in. I don't know if that's good or bad necessarily, but it does seem it dovetails. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I try my best to focus in on specifically on the paranormal because I'm so attuned to that. But I feel like that part of my job is also to discuss the potential of other entities or beings that exist out there. And there are recurring themes that come up, and it's all paranormal, so it's not, you can't explain it. But like a lot of people talk about shadow figures and like little kind of like dog-like creatures, and there's a lot of different types of potential cryptoids, and it could be like a evil entity as well.
Mm-hmm, right. Yeah, I've actually had people, more and more people are actually saying they're seeing shadow people. I don't know if you're getting more reports of that or not.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of shadow people. I mean, it happened to me at the S.K. Pierce Victorian Mansion in Gardner, and I haven't had a shadow person experience recently, but I have had it in my past. And usually that's dark. Usually it's a dark energy. And what's been spotted both at the Houghton Mansion and also in the S.K. Pierce Victorian and Gardner have been shadow figures in the basement.
That's interesting. So do you see those with your peripheral vision, or do you see them like full on?
I've seen them full on, but usually it's peripheral.
Okay.
Peripheral. But I've seen them full on, and you can actually make out them crossing your path. So I have seen that, and it happened. I mean, the most vivid was at the oldest house in Cambridge, Mass, which is close to where I live in Somerville. And so it was at this old house that I was visiting, and it walked right by me, and it was clear as day. It wasn't to change the light. It was just my personal experience, and I'm sure if I had someone that was a paranormal investigator, they probably could discount like what was happening. Mm-hmm. But for me, it was clearly shaped as a person.
That's
or
interesting.
As a shadow. Yeah.
Well, I get a lot of reports of that also. So what is the energetic signature when you experience something like this? What does it feel like when you see these things?
Shadow figures specifically, I try to get away.
Okay.
I'm not scared. I'm not scared of the paranormal or things that happen, but certain things I'm wary of, and that's shadow people. To me, it's a negative energy.
Right. Does it feel heavy in some way?
It feels heavy. Yeah, it definitely feels heavy, and you can feel them walk by you. It's almost like you can feel their energy, and they could be vampires too. They could be energy vampires.
Well, it's like a parallel bleed through. You know what my idea is with those? I think that they are people who had too much density when they transferred out. They didn't have enough light to raise their vibration to the next level, dimensional space, and that they're kind of caught and they're kind of lost.
Right.
And to me, it just seems like a density, like something didn't shift in consciousness or through that being when they transferred out. And that's just my own theory anyway. But that's the way I look at them, because it seems to me like they're kind of stuck in density.
Yeah, there's definitely a sensation of them being stuck. And the place that I had the shadow person experience was it was an older house dating back to the oldest house in Cambridge dating back to the 1600s, and it was in this slaves' quarter. So it was where it was on the third floor, the top floor. So there was a lot of sadness at that location.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It seems to me, like I said, there's such a busy, busy world. I mean, we have so much drama going on the linear scale, with the illusion of living, right? And then there's all this other stuff happening here that we're constantly being bombarded with. I think if people were to see everything with multidimensional eyes and psychic vision, they'd probably lose it.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I have to turn it off.
I was going to say, it just gets too much, it just gets to the point where it becomes overwhelming. I would say there is so much, but you have to ask yourself, why aren't these beings able to move on, or what's holding them in limitation? And do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, Shut up people specifically, but I have what are known as stay behinds. The stay behinds, they don't know that they're dead. And I think what the stay behinds, once they figure out that they've passed and they can go to the light, they're able to cross over. But for the shadow figures or shadow people, I don't necessarily know if they're even intelligent. I just think that they're just residual energy that's trapped here.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I know. Well, Heidi Hollis, I'm sure you're familiar with her. She talks about the Hat Man. And yeah, she's real familiar with that one too, which is kind of an ominous presence. You know, who wears the hat. He's kind of like, I don't want to say he's the angel of death, but it's kind of that ominous presence that hovers around and kind of bothers people, and is also a trickster. So yeah, it's real interesting to me. This is why I'm a firm believer in protection and shielding and psychic shielding, whether you believe it or not, because energy is energy. I don't care how you define it. And there are ways we have to set our boundaries so that we're not taking on more than we have to from whatever dimensional space.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to protect yourself, and the more and more I get into, my mother, she's sensitive too, and she's Southern. She's like, Sam, you have to, don't deal with the dark stuff, because unfortunately that's kind of the next level. Like the 13 Most Haunted, there's a lot of potential entities featured in the book, and so the locations that I went to are darker than I typically deal with. And I like to, my books are history books with ghost stories, but 13 Most Haunted is a little different. It's definitely, there's a lot of potential, demonic, I wouldn't say demonic infestation, but just dark entities that exist.
Right. Well, maybe with malicious intent, maybe things there with a malicious presence to them, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, I think let's say someone commits suicide, or if they were murdered, or they murdered somebody, like that would leave that darker imprint on a location.
Right. I agree. Well, the funny thing is, if there's really evil people, which obviously there are, I mean, not everybody's a nice person, and they transfer out and they're evil and they don't get it. I'm a firm believer that they really don't go anywhere. Like I said, it's density. If they haven't raised their consciousness or vibration and they're hostile, I suspect they hover out in a parallel dimensional space, which I'm sure psychics pick up on. And this is what I mean by, I've participated with crossing rituals before where we've actually allowed for these people to ascend if they need to or move on. And I think that is a very effective thing, but it also can be very dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. So I don't know if you're familiar with the crossing rituals, or if you are familiar with people who have done those.
I'm familiar with people who do them. They actually do it in Salem, in front of the public. But yeah, I'm friends with clergy and with priests, and I kind of go more that route with that type of thing. Because for example, I had a stay behind a woman who that I was very close with. She called her the seamstress. Or Scissor Sister was kind of like my joking name, but she lived in the house with me, and she was part of my first book when I was writing my Goes to Boston. And she was Catholic, and I actually had a friend bless the house, and she crossed over. And so everyone does it different. Some people use coffin nails, some people use ritual. It depends on what your beliefs are. But for me personally, I tend to go with what they know. So based on what I gathered on my research, she was Catholic, so I wanted to go that route with her.
I think that was a good idea. Yeah, you touched on that before, and I think that's a very good idea. And of course, yeah, like I said, crossing rituals aren't for everybody. It depends on how you do them, and it depends on the group too and the collective of consciousness. Because, in my opinion, you can't screw around with that stuff. If you're opening portals and gateways, you have to know what you're doing. But what about exorcism? Have you ever had to have an exorcism done in the house, or something to that level where you really had to boogie blast it hardcore?
No, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised that's coming soon.
Well, don't put that out there.
no, I mean, or just I have not had that experience, but I have seen it and I have heard about it, and I do believe that it does exist.
Right. Well, I think that, this is just calibration to be able to go into different dimensional spaces. And I really respect your information. Like I said, I love the fact that you're a historian on these things. This is very big because you're actually checking out the history of the whole environment, the whole place, and then incorporating the ghost stories. And I think that's really nice. Most people don't do that. So that's a good thing.
I mean, for me, getting kind of making my mother feel safe. I don't like the S.K. Pierce house. I don't spend a lot of time there. So I have friends who do have spent years in that house and have researched it and done EVP sessions. I'm so sensitive. I can only spend 20 minutes at a location that's extremely haunted, or it will overwhelm me. So I protect myself by not, going into a location, spending too much time there, because I do think that's that's with me. It's something I have to. That's my way of protecting myself from the location. My time at the S.K. Pierce house in Gardner was so memorable that I don't need to spend more than a couple hours. I'm not gonna spend a night or a week at that location in the house, because I know it's active, and I dream about it. I've sensed it. I've had encounters there. That's enough for me. Right.
No, I don't blame you at all. It reminds me of The Shining. I mean, the more energetic the more you stay there, the more you get pulled into it, and there's potential to be taken over to some degree. And I'm a firm believer that people can be influenced by whatever entity is out there trying to feed off the life force of the prana, especially if these people are into it. If they're into the investigation, or if they're into wanting to sleep there, then the more they stay there, the more they're going to absorb some of that energetic signature, in my opinion, unless they do a really hardcore clearing or protection.
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of equated myself to the kid from The Shining, like Danny Torrance. Mm-hmm. I'm that kid, so I've grown up into that, and so I have to. Because of that, I have The Shining, or whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. I have to protect that, but it's also it's a gift and it's a curse. So it's like I have to not be at a location, because really, like The Shining, for example, it's about that energy, sort of like that psychic imprint that's left on all that murder and mayhem that happened at the Overlook, has left itself in, it's imprinted itself on that location. And to me, like, that is sort of the quintessential ghost story, the Shining, because that is my life, except for I haven't, had the same experiences as Deanie, but that's kind of how I interact with the spirits as well.
Some and you have to learn to control that, otherwise it can get too intrusive. I can understand that, definitely. The Stanley Hotel out here, obviously I'm in Colorado, but the Stanley Hotel obviously has some energetic signatures. A lot of people go there. Have you been there?
I have not, but my friends who have, the paranormal investigators that have, and they've had experiences there, so they tell me, like, I heard the sort of a voice in my ear. So the Omni Parker House is sort of like Boston's equivalent of the hotel. So I've had similar experiences.
That's great. And Sam, we're going to head for a break. Everybody, please stay tuned. We'll be right back. Ravenstar's Witching Hour. My special guest is Sam Baltrusis.